Throughout the world, the consumption of electricity is inexorably increasing, especially in the industrialized countries. Every year, the insatiable consumers of electrical power use a few percent more. Hydroelectric power stations were once able to satisfy the hunger for electricity. But the rivers and lakes have long since been unable to keep up with the increase in demand. Nuclear power stations were built to make up the shortfall. They now supply a large percentage of the steadily growing electrical power needs of our consumer society. But what has all this to do with American Indians? Is there some kind of direct link between our consumer paradise and these Aboriginal inhabitants of the United States? The Grand Canyon, one of the most beautiful natural wonders of the world, and the United States' most visited national park. The rocks were eroded over millions of years by the Colorado River. It's this cross-section through the Earth's crust, as much as its beauty, that makes the Grand Canyon so interesting to geologists. Copper, gold, and other minerals are very close to the surface here. But geologists and industrialists are even more interested in a substance that has been used to make bombs as well as electricity, uranium, because this is where the United States' largest deposits of uranium are found. For the Pai Indians who have lived near this most beautiful of monuments for centuries, the Grand Canyon has always had a special significance. For them, it's the birthplace of Mother Earth, and thus sacred ground. They consider themselves its protector and guardian. But very few of the millions of visitors know that as well as gold, copper, silver, and coal, uranium is also mined in the Grand Canyon area, or that in the valley below, an Indian nation has survived for centuries, the Havasupai. Possibly their perceptions are confused by the conflicting symbols of two very different cultures. Here on Havasupai Hilltop, some 30 miles from the Grand Canyon Tourist Center, it's the end of the road for motor vehicles. Whoever wants to visit the Havasupai must continue on foot or on the back of a horse or mule. The journey takes between 3 and 4 hours, the path winding its way down to the valley through a seemingly barren landscape. Ever narrower ravines lead into a side canyon of the Grand Canyon. Down in the valley, water brings life to the inhospitable rocky terrain. Havasu Creek, a tributary of the Colorado River, converts it into a fertile oasis. The Havasupai held sway over large areas of what is now the Grand Canyon National Park, long before the white conquerors arrived. The first treaty with the federal government dates from 1880. The area occupied by the Havasupai was drastically reduced. A reservation was created inside the new boundaries. Numbering some 600 souls, the Havasupai are one of the smallest Indian nations in the United States. Supai has remained the center of the reservation and is the only village in the United States without direct access by road. The only path leads directly into the center of Supai, where the same scene is repeated daily. Instead of overcrowded streets packed with motor vehicles, a village square busy with horse traffic. The commodities that are on offer in our supermarkets 24 hours a day and 7 days a week must make the arduous journey from Hualapai Hilltop to Supai on muleback and in small quantities. More than half the Havasupai men earn their living as carriers under tribal administration. In this out-of-the-way place, there's hardly any other employment. Not least because of the difficult supply route, cans and junk food are much in evidence on the shelves of Supai's only food store. But stocks are limited mostly to the bare necessities. The food store belongs to the community and is the responsibility of the tribal council. Whites are helping out until the store can be operated completely independently. In the new laws imposed by the white man, there was no room for traditional tribal leaders. They were replaced by the tribal council, which is elected by the Havasupai themselves. The same building houses a post office that is already being run entirely by the Havasupai. The postmistress grew up in the village. Nowhere else in the United States do letters start their journey on muleback. Now very much sought after by collectors throughout the world is the special postmark of the mule train mail. The local meeting point is immediately in front of this building. The bench serves as a good place for exchanging news. The notice board alongside is another source of information. The American Throwaway Society has also found its way to Supai, and the difficulties of bringing in food are reflected in the modest menu. The restaurant is only open during the day, and as is the case throughout the reservation, alcohol is taboo. A network of narrow paths links the houses of the Havasupai to the village square. Corn and beans are the staple foods here, and they're grown in front of every house. But the land available for corn has long been insufficient to support the food needs of the whole village. What would these Native Americans do if it weren't for the plentiful supply of water? A settled form of existence would be inconceivable. The water enables them to enjoy good harvests, despite the scarcity of land. Havasupai territory once stretched across the whole area now taken up by the Grand Canyon National Park. Before unrestricted hunting was banned and wild animals abounded, the Havasupai spent the winter months up on the plateau. In summer, they returned to the valley floor and cultivated their land to build up stocks of food, which they stored in caves.
When doing a harvest, we put our canned corn up there on the cliffs, wall it like a refrigerator.
The oldest members of the tribe remember those times well and pass down the history of their people to a new generation.
Open them pits. That's where we have our food.
The Havasupai don't do much formal celebrating. But at the annual Peach Festival in August, the drums are brought out to thank the great spirits and ancestors for the plentiful harvest. Far away from the hectic civilized world, the life of the Havasupai has stayed simple, and only a few satellite dishes look out over the cornfields. Although the much sought-after source of energy for our nuclear power stations comes from the home of these Native Americans, they themselves have so far managed to live with only a very modest consumption of electricity. The new laws of the white man have made the traditional Indian way of life impossible. Although the Indian laws permit a certain amount of autonomy, the tentacles of white bureaucracy even reach as far as this tiny village. Here in Supai's town hall, the age of the computer has only arrived quite recently. The Havasupai are now learning how to come to terms with high technology. This is also where the only bank is located, which is managed by the Havasupai themselves, and the office of the 7-strong tribal council is here too. The tribal council represents the Havasupai to the outside world and to the government of the United States. Down here, several hours' walk from the nearest road, one of the main problems is maintaining a medical service.
Would you like me to get your chart and see?
I'm waiting for the
For
results.
the results?
Yeah,
Yeah.
to come in.
Do you take medicine for your blood pressure? I can hear you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Supai Clinic is now better equipped than it once was, but the physicians provided by the United States Public Health Service are only on duty for a week at a time, which means a rather frequent change of family doctor. One can but hope that this will end, and that a doctor will come to live here permanently. The important status of the elders finds practical recognition in the self-help organization built up by the Havasupai. The elderly and sick, as well as those who live on their own, can have their midday meal in the Social Services Center. Havasupai women cook about 50 meals here every day. Meals are even taken to the homes of those who are too ill or weak to come here. At the same time, the housework is done. Special federal laws apply to Indian reservations. The BIA is responsible for law and order. BIA is the abbreviation for the largely unloved Bureau of Indian Affairs, whose headquarters are in far-off Washington. Originally created to mediate between Native Americans and whites, the BIA became more and more influential and powerful, not always to the advantage of the Indians. The Havasupai economy depends very much on tourism. Without the revenue from the tourists during the short summer season, the restaurant in Supai would not be economically viable and would have to close. As it is, the modern, well-equipped kitchen provides work for several Havasupai women. Incomes on the Havasupai Reservation are well below the average for the United States. The Havasupai receive nothing from the profits generated by the Grand Canyon National Park. In fact, the opposite is the case. Like the tourists, they too now have to pay to get into the largest of the world's wonders. The Havasupai have developed their own tourist industry. The one and only visitor lodge in Supai was built 10 years ago, exclusively for tourists. In the season, the lodge is usually fully booked.
Couple of weeks ago, 3 weeks ago.
No, just go ahead and do it in the back of this. There and
Tourists are not pampered with unnecessary comfort here, but they can count on clean rooms and friendly service. And just as they would in a hotel in a major city, they get a computerized check, assuming, that is, that the power supply hasn't failed, as it often does. Without the tourist dollars, the only work would be for the tribal administration and the Bureau of Indian Affairs. The tourists know little about such facts of local life. Many of them, laden with backpack and tent, come just to enjoy the idyllic surroundings. All visitors are required to make a financial contribution and pay their entry fee at the Havasupai tourist office. It's widely known that the Havasupai live in one of the world's most beautiful spots. The beauty of water colliding with rocks can hardly be more impressive than at the 3 waterfalls in Havasu Creek. Tourists tend to gather mainly at the middle waterfall, Havasu Falls. At its foot, several rock pools of green-blue water provide an inviting prospect for swimmers. It was the color of the water that gave the tribe its name. Havasupai means people of the green-blue water. Downstream is Mooney Falls. It's the last obstacle that Havasu Creek has to overcome before flowing a further 2.5 miles to join the Grand Canyon's main waterway, the Colorado River. Today, the tourists disturb the peace of what is a sacred place to the Havasupai. But what do the tourists know about the shrines, religion, culture, and way of life of these indigenous people? They can discover more about the history of the Havasupai in the Tribal Museum. After the white intruders had seized the Havasupai's land, they crammed the aged tribal leaders and their people into a newly created reservation at the bottom of the canyon. As the white man's hunger for land grew, so the Havasupai Reservation shrank. It wasn't until the Grand Canyon Enlargement Act of 1975 that this injustice was partially remedied, and the Havasupai Reservation was enlarged again. But any claims outside the reservation boundaries were nullified. At the same time, the Havasupai were promised that they could use their original land for religious purposes. Sometimes Rex Toulouse, the religious and spiritual leader of the Havasupai, goes and fetches his drums from the museum. Much of the cultural heritage of these Native Americans has remained intact, especially their religion. But the Havasupai are reluctant to talk about their religious beliefs in public, and not everyone is allowed to witness religious rituals. Songs and dances, on the other hand, are often performed in the village square. This performance is for the benefit of the children of the Zunis, who are spending their holidays with their tribal relations, the Havasupai. At the heart of the tribe's religion are the Creator and Mother Nature. The Havasupai worship nature, including the mountains that were once part of their territory, but which now lie outside the reservation as a result of the new boundary legislation. Red Butte, which is not far from the Grand Canyon Tourist Center, is the sacred mountain of the Havasupai. At the foot of this sacred mountain, about 4 miles from the summit, the winding tower of a uranium mine rises into the sky. The mine is ready to be worked, and it will become operational as soon as world prices for uranium increase. The military requirements of yesteryear have been replaced by the political, commercial, and scientific interests of today.
According to our religion, the area, the Red Butte, the mine site area here, we feel that the birth of the Havasupai people took place here. And to sink the shaft into the earth where we are now standing, this area where we regard as the abdomen of our Mother Earth. The birth that the Indian people came into this life is towards the north of us where the canyon area is now. That place of emergence to the Hopi, to the Zuni, to the Acoma, to the Havasupai people, to the Wallapai people, other Pueblo tribes that live east of us into New Mexico also regard the Grand Canyon area as their place of emergence.
The corporation responsible for this uranium mining project on the south rim of the Grand Canyon is Energy Fuels Nuclear of Denver, or EFN for short. Until now, EFN's uranium mining activities in the Grand Canyon have been confined to the north rim. EFN is the leading uranium mining corporation in the United States. The chief executive officer of EFN comments on the religious significance of Red Butte for the Havasupai.
Yeah, we have doubts about that, and I think a little bit of the history about the mine and the time that we found it in juxtaposition with their claim might be of help. Exploration of that area began in 1979, and we were very active, and the people that were out there earlier than we were very active in exploring with drill rigs, drilling holes, doing geological tests and whatnot. And it really wasn't until 1984 or 1985 that the religious claim by the Indians ever was made. We had long since before that indicated to people that we were ready to build a mine, that we had found a uranium ore body. We had notified the federal agencies and the local governments, and only after we had filed our applications for licenses and permits did the Indians, through the Havasupai, did they ever raise the religious claim. So it came as a very late claim by the Indians in the process. The first concern they had was not about religion or a religious site, it was about the protection of water quality.
Uranium has been mined in the Grand Canyon area for 50 years, until now almost exclusively along the North Rim. Following the discovery of uranium fission, mines spread like wildfire around the Grand Canyon, making this strip of Arizona the stronghold of uranium mining in the 1950s and 60s. But EFN Denver didn't arrive until the 1970s.
When we saw this, when we heard about this, we were really hurt. And when they didn't notify the tribe that this was happening, that also even went deeper. When they told us 2 or 3 years after this has happened, then they went against us saying we didn't say anything when it started. They didn't let us know that this was happening up here. After this happened, then they let us know. And now they were using that to say we didn't say anything when this started. We didn't know this was happening up here. That's the reason why we didn't say anything.
They were made aware very early on in the process of the exploration and evaluation. In fact, several representatives of Energy Fuels actually went down on horseback to the Havasupai village at the bottom of the Grand Canyon to advise the Indians of our activities, the fact that we had made an economic discovery, and that we wanted to construct a mine, that we would be applying for a license. And that meeting was well in advance of our application, and during that meeting there was no mention at all of any religious significance to the site.
No church, no cross. So in the eyes of the white man, Red Butte is not a sacred mountain.
The superintendent or the president here came down into Supai and told us that why are we fighting, that we shouldn't be fighting them, that if he gave us $250,000 to stop fighting them, but we said no. Money isn't worth the lives of the people that you are going to be contaminating in future years to come. Money isn't worth the loss, the wildlife, the plant life, the earth, the sacredness that you have destroyed has meant to the people before you went and destroyed it. So we feel that what you have done, what we are fighting for, what we are living for, what we believe in, is more important than money. So we said, no, we don't want your money. We want you to leave the canyon, the sacredness of the area alone.
Every court appealed to so far has dismissed the religious arguments of the Havasupai. In March 1992, the Supreme Court of the United States was not even prepared to consider the Havasupai's legal action for freedom to exercise their religion. The courts have decided commercial interests take priority over the territorial claims on religious grounds of Native Americans. Such is the law of the white man. Apart from the disregard of their religion, the Havasupai are anxious about something else: the effect of uranium mining on the environment and the people who live here. This is the settling pond for Kanab North, the last uranium mine in the United States to be worked. As with most mines here, the uranium is mined underground. The miners bring out the ore through a giant shaft. During this operation, the air is extracted and toxic radon gas is pumped into the atmosphere. This uranium disintegration product can become widely dispersed and settle in the lungs. Lung cancer may follow. Byproducts of mining are uranium dust, a higher level of radioactivity, and uranium-contaminated water, which evaporates. Despite this, some specialists insist that uranium mining is harmless.
Uranium mining is no more hazardous than many other types of industrial work, activities involving trucking or foundry workers or timber industry. They're all similar in exposure to potential accidents, similar to mining, so very, very much the same.
The Kanab mine was also recently closed because Russia is now flooding the market with cheap uranium.
The Energy Fuels position in the uranium industry, I think, will always be foremost, number one in the business because of our holdings here in the Arizona Strip, which are very unusual. They're very environmentally acceptable, and they are very permittable under the present strict regulations, particularly in the case of dealing with uranium, where the mining can be almost completely erased, and the land surface can almost be entirely restored to its natural original formation, and our footsteps can be eradicated without leaving any traces of our activities here. So I think we'll be here for a long time. We are prudent miners, careful miners, and we are environmentally sensitive miners.
As soon as prices recover sufficiently, uranium mining will start up again here and also at Red Butte. As before, the uranium ore will be transported in massive open trucks through some of the most beautiful countryside in the southwest of the United States, past Lake Powell, through Monument Valley, and the Navajo Indian Reservation. EFN processes its ore in Blanding, Utah, about 120 miles from the Grand Canyon. This mill is also not in use at the moment. The risks associated with processing uranium ore are much greater than those of mining it. The ore is crushed, and the uranium is extracted with highly toxic chemicals. Around the uranium ore processing plant, the poisonous radioactive water evaporates in tailing ponds. These are sealed with plastic because seepage into the groundwater would have devastating consequences. The tailing sludge that remains after evaporation is a slurry of chemicals and uranium residues. The radioactivity of this sludge is about 85% of that of the original uranium. The dried toxic mass is then covered with earth. This disposal method is considered reliable and harmless by the corporation responsible, and it does not contravene the existing environmental laws and regulations. Yellow cake, the highly radioactive raw product of the first uranium enrichment stage, is stored in drums and again taken away by truck. The Orphan Mine is the oldest uranium mine in the Grand Canyon. It's only half a mile from the visitor center. Although the Orphan Mine has not been used for decades, the mine shafts are still not properly sealed off. The radioactivity remains, even if the passing tourists don't notice it. In the heyday of uranium mining, there were dozens of mines in the Grand Canyon area. A law from the days of the Wild West, the Mining Act of 1872, still allows anybody to lay claim to federal land if it can be proved that mineable minerals lie beneath the surface. The mines were closed long ago, but not all of them were properly decontaminated. Some were simply abandoned, and today they radiate danger into the environment. About 40 miles from the Grand Canyon Tourist Center is Tuba City. In the 1950s and 60s, Tuba City was the center of the uranium boom. What remains are not just contaminated areas, but sick people, like these members of the Navajo Tribe, Max and Betty Ann Huskin. Max once worked in a uranium mine. Today he suffers from skin cancer, most probably caused by exposure to uranium dust. His wife Betty is similarly affected. She used to wash his clothes with her bare hands. The American government has apologized to the victims of the uranium mining operations of the 50s and 60s and awarded them compensation. The Huskin's illness was not acknowledged as being the result of Max's work in the uranium mine. They're left to deal with their misery as best they can. Outside Tuba City, abandoned houses and contaminated water, but the animals graze on unawares. And people depend on water in this arid environment. The contaminated water is in the catchment area of the Colorado River, and it eventually flows down into the Grand Canyon. The Colorado, held in check by the Hoover Dam, does not only help to generate electricity for Nevada, Arizona, and Southern California, it also supplies these areas with water. Since the Havasupai live at the bottom of the Grand Canyon, it's little wonder that they're afraid that their water supply will be further endangered by new uranium mines. What would the people of the blue-green water be without their life-giving liquid? It's not just swimming that would be threatened. It would mean the end of the Havasupai's very existence. What happened to their neighbors, the Navajo, is warning enough for the Havasupai. They've long since stopped believing the protestations of the federal government and the uranium managers that mining today carries no risk, even if mining operations and the enrichment process are subject to more laws and regulations than previously. The drinking water, the orchards, and the animals that are so important for their existence would all be endangered. Moreover, news of environmental contamination would drive away the Havasupai's main source of revenue, the tourists. After all, who would choose to spend time in a contaminated paradise?
For the uranium, that's something that we are going to be affected by probably in years to come. So it won't show up right away, but it will probably like 20, 30 years from now. And you'll probably have like birth defects. Probably the trees and whoever drinks the water.
The tourists are ignorant of the potential danger. It's only the message carried by anti-uranium T-shirts that makes some of them aware of the Havasupai's fight. The situation may seem hopeless, but not one Havasupai has given up, especially not the president of the tribal council.
So it's a water contamination issue we've been fighting for concerning this mine.
Have you talked with EF in Denver about that?
We've been in the courtrooms with that for the last, ever since it's the beginning of, when tribe had heard of this mine, the canyon mine going up. That's one of the issues that we've been fighting against in the courts. And we're currently in the courts still with the Department of Environmental Quality on the groundwater permit. EFN can say whatever they please, but the bottom line is it'll be contaminated.
The Grand Canyon is an area of outstanding natural beauty. But without water, it would be a hostile environment. Quite close to the village of Supai, it suddenly transforms the desert into an oasis. Green bushes, then trees, and the village with its farmland. It's little wonder that the Havasupai are concerned about their sacred source of life, and the whole area they consider the birthplace of Mother Earth. Thunderstorms have shown what tremendous volumes of water can be set in motion throughout this region. But the Chief Executive Officer of EFN does not share this concern.
It's important to note that uranium ore is not a hazardous substance, but mining, including uranium mining, is heavily regulated by the federal and state government, so that everything we do has got to be approved in advance. How we design the mine, how we mine it, how we transport it, the security that we go through, the safety of the miners, all of that is subject to very stringent federal and state regulation. And we comply with it and usually go beyond what the regulations require. So all of the aspects of the mining would be subject to the license conditions and the rules and regulations. And in fact, Energy Fuels has received at least 10 safety awards for the way in which we've operated the mine, in addition to the awards we've received for reclamation of exploration sites as well as mining sites.
So there are awards for environment-conscious uranium mining. EFN takes above-average precautionary measures and enjoys a reputation for exemplary, safe uranium mining operations. This is what an EFN mine looked like when it was being used. And this is what it looks like under the current reclamation legislation. But the tougher regulations only came into effect in the 1970s. Many of the older mines continue to radiate unabated. The Jackpile mine, once the world's largest open-pit uranium mine, is only now being cleaned up, although it's situated right next to a village inhabited by Laguna Indians. Despite all the regulations and precautions, EFN have had accidents. For example, at the Hack Canyon mine.
While the mine was operating, we had a very, very intense thunderstorm that came down the canyon and washed away about 10 tons of low-grade uranium ore. And it went downstream about 100 yards. We picked it all up and brought it back to the pile. It was not a violation of any rule or regulation, but people like to talk about it as though it was something that contaminated the environment or was illegal, and that just simply isn't correct.
You think an accident like this could still happen these days?
No, we take more precautions these days with our mines to make sure that the ore is segregated from even a 500-year serious rainfall event. They measure rainfall events by how frequently it would happen per 100 years or per 500 years. And we design now all of our mines to withstand that one event that would happen once every 500 years in terms of a thunderstorm or rainfall.
But the reality is somewhat different. It shows that the local weather is unpredictable and likely to remain so. In 1979, a dam burst at Church Rock, causing radioactive tailing sludge to be washed into the Puerco River, a tributary of the Colorado. The corporation operating the mine was not made responsible for clearing up and disposing of the radioactive waste. That is the legal reality. For several decades, the Southwest Research Center in Albuquerque has carried out various surveys in this part of the United States.
I think that any time there's a spill or a release from a waste pond, that there's not only liquids that move downstream, but also solid sediments that contaminate the stream bed. And so while the water may move downstream, some of the sediments will stay in the sand in the stream bed itself. And every time there's another rainfall and flow in that stream, the sediments are moved further downstream. So they represent a continuing source of contamination unless they're removed. And that's very seldom done. The largest spill from a tailings pile that I'm aware of occurred in Navajo country in 1979, where the United Nuclear Church Rock tailings dam broke, and about 400 million liters of tailings liquid poured out into a stream, and that flow was seen 80 kilometers downstream in the state of Arizona, and less than 1% of the volume of that spill was cleaned up. And that's the most dramatic release from a tailing site.
Had there been measurements done after that accident?
Yes, there have been several measurements, and measurements done 10 or 12 years after the spill show elevated radium and uranium levels in groundwater and in some of the stream sediments that are associated with that spill and with mine water runoff in the Church Rock district.
Although Church Rock is a long way from Supai, the two places are linked by the Colorado River. The Havasupai are afraid that there could be similar accidents. Is this fear justified?
The concern for groundwater contamination in the area of the Canyon Mine is a very reasonable concern. It's in an area where there are very few water supplies. And the ore body, which is a tall, skinny column of ore, cuts through several different layers, which could be aquifers and which do produce water downstream of the mine. So the potential for groundwater contamination is a very real one. And once groundwaters are contaminated, they're extremely difficult and expensive to reclaim. So the idea of prevention as opposed to restoration is an appropriate concern, certainly.
Radioactivity is introduced into the human food chain through animal meat. The consequences of uranium mining are especially serious on the Navajo reservation, but the federal government has concealed as much as possible. This charge comes from no less an authority than Stuart Udall, Secretary of the Interior in the Kennedy and Johnson administrations. Today, Mr. Udall is the legal representative of the Navajo.
The whole uranium mining tragedy was hidden from the American people. It was hidden from the rest of the people in the government by secrecy, by the feeling that this was part of our national security effort to get more bombs and bomb materials. And since we didn't know the truth about uranium mining and the dangers, and the atomic energy crowd in the United States and the bomb people said, well, we know what we're doing and it's safe, that the issue was only raised for the first time in 1967.
At the time, there was a lung cancer epidemic in the southwest of the United States. Tailings, contaminated waste, used to be considered an excellent building material. For decades, tailings were given to the Navajo free of charge for building their houses, schools, and play areas. The outcome, cancer.
So the medical record is pretty clear today as far as the miners are concerned. In fact, one of the judges, when I was in court, and he heard us arguing this, and the government said, well, they were trying to find out. They were trying to find out whether there was danger, and he said, I wouldn't use that argument. You were using them as guinea pigs.
Surveys have shown that more Navajo babies are born with defects, and there is more cancer, than anywhere else in the United States. After the Navajos' experience, one really should know better, but so far not much has changed. The mine installations can be activated at any time. Human beings are at the mercy of radioactivity. It cannot be sensed, felt, or smelled, and its effects only become apparent years later. Not even the purification ceremony in the traditional sweat lodge can help.
Close the cover.
The uranium managers maintain that the small amount of radiation released during uranium mining is absolutely harmless and does not contravene any United States laws or regulations. Professor John Gofman, nuclear chemist and former director of biomedicine at the Lawrence Livermore Nuclear Research Center, does not think there's such a thing as a harmless dose of radioactivity.
Well, if you're looking for the question of hazard, you first look at high doses because you expect the effects to be bigger. And so we knew what the answer was at high doses. But there was so much propaganda that probably there was a safe dose that people almost assumed there was no hazard at low doses. But as a scientist, you don't assume that. As a scientist, you say to yourself, you want to know what radiation does? If you know it does something at high doses, you better find out what it does at low doses. And that's a crucial question. An industry that might be quite popular and used widely if it had no hazard at low doses would be cheap to run. Think of all the things you wouldn't have to do if you could just dump the stuff left over, say from your uses, just anywhere. It'd be cheaper. But you need to know that depends on low doses. And so I started to explore the evidence. And I've been 20 years working on it.
Is there a safe dose of radiation?
We have a thing called permissible doses or tolerable doses, and that translates into how many people you're going to kill. I consider these issuances of murder permits, and the question then becomes, what do you think is all right? A murder permit to kill one person out of every 10,000, that's okay, but maybe 1 out of 1,000 would not be okay, or it's okay to kill 1 in 100,000 but not 1 in 10,000. You're playing games with other people's lives. Those people who are the victims want to know who gave you this permission to permit.
This rock formation is a so-called breccia pipe. It consists of uranium ore. In the whole Grand Canyon area, mining companies have registered 90,000 mining claims. These rich uranium deposits have also aroused international interest.
When you build a nuclear power plant, you usually hope that it'll run 30, 40, 50 years, and you want to know that over the long term you've got fuel. Fuel is not very expensive, the uranium is not very expensive, but without the uranium the power plant can't produce any power, any electricity. So the Swiss utilities, being long-term planners, decided to get part of their uranium from the United States with a mining company, and for that reason they went into partnership with us to make sure that they had their hands on a stable and secure source of uranium.
The uranium from the Canyon project, assuming that it actually gets underway, would probably keep a nuclear power station going for many years, irrespective of whether Red Butte is sacred to Native Americans or not, because most of the uranium mined is for export. Switzerland is just one example. 40% of Canyon mine stock is held by the Swiss nuclear power corporations Guzgen and NOK. Isn't it time to stop taking uranium from the Grand Canyon in the interests of the Native Americans who live there?
No, the Indians are not affected. The Havasupai live at the bottom of the Grand Canyon on their reservation. There is no uranium mining there, and there won't be any in future. We need nuclear power because 40% of Switzerland's electrical energy is produced in nuclear power stations. So we depend on it. It's really up to the consumer to use less energy. That would certainly help.
And so the buck is passed. Up against the legal interests of the Uranium Corporation and the nuclear power consumers in the industrialized countries, the tiny Havasupai Nation has no chance. The breccia pipes that rise up out of the Grand Canyon are far too tempting.
Nuclear regulatory, EPA, all these are just fronts, and they're all working together, you know, and that's something we need to take to the public and let them know that the Environmental Protection Agency protecting the environment. It sounds like they're protecting the environment. Now let's let them protect the environment for what they're there for, what they stand for, instead of having them working hand in hand with the radioactive companies, the mining companies, what's safe and what's not. No matter what they put on paper, how safe they say it is on paper, it'll never be safe once you bring radioactivity into the atmosphere.
After 500 years, it's surely time to stop oppressing Native Americans and exploiting their homeland.
If and all the uranium keeps going on, and if anybody in this whole tribe has the balls, I'll pick up the rifle, and I won't put it down unless he puts a bullet through my head, because I really fear for my grandchildren, and my children, and my children's children. Maybe some of the warriors will help me. And if it takes bodies to sacrifice it, well, then we'll have to sacrifice it, because I'm a non-member of this tribe, but I'll bring other non-members here to sacrifice their lives for this tribe if this tribe don't want to. White man way, way up, way up.
Red Butte, sacred mountain of the Havasupai, the people of the blue-green water. One day the canyon mine is likely to become operational, and everything will be above board. 500 years after the arrival of Columbus in America, the laws are framed in such a way that those who generate or consume electricity need not be troubled by a bad conscience, because everything is legal. After all, who really cares that the original people of the Grand Canyon are not prepared to accept the exploitation of their territory and the rape of Mother Earth?